Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Communications and Cigars. I'm your host, John Crook. Thank you for joining us. It is Monday, November 28th of 2022. I hope everybody that's tuning in had a enjoyable Thanksgiving. And more importantly, guess what? Right after Thanksgiving is Black Friday, and today was Cyber Monday. So I said, you know what? Well, I'll shopped out already and everything. That actually, not really. I haven't done any really shopping at all. But guess what? I decided to say, you know what? Let's do an episode this evening. We're recuperating and everything like that. So, you know what? Let's do an episode here. So, welcome to tonight's episode of Communications and Cigars, Season 2, Episode 4, entitled FleetCall Nextel, born 1987, died 2005. Yes, that's right. That one that I've been talking about all along, that episode of Nextel. We're going to take a look back at the history of Nextel and where it came from and why. Because I miss Nextel. That's why. But yes, we're going to take a look at it. And actually, it's kind of an interesting sort of a rags to riches story that I kind of uncovered and stuff like that on there. So I said, you know what, let's go ahead and let's take a look in history into it. So, but first of all, I want to go ahead and thank everybody for tuning into Communications and Cigars. We tried to be on Mondays if we can, and try to also try to get episodes and videos out there. Obviously, things have gotten a lot busy with everything, so we don't get to do as much as we wanted to, like we did in Season 1, but we are working on that, and hopefully we will get some things up and running. I like to do the show live, of course. And if we can't do it live, we do it here Monday nights at 8 p.m. So with that being said, if you do ever have any questions, wondering when the next show is coming up, something, hey, John, I want to ask some questions or something like that, I got ideas for a show, don't be afraid to drop us an email at communications-cigars@jjkcom.com. Once again, communications-cigars@jjkcom.com. That's right. JJK Communications is a sponsor of Communications-Cigars or Communications and Cigars. And we are also going to be getting them as a sponsor for our MCOM Chat podcast. Yes, we have a few in the hopper right there, putting the finishing touches on those. And MCOM Chat podcast is going to kind of be that extension of the Communications and Cigars, where we can have a little bit more, where we can talk about a few things on there and not necessarily have to have the video going along with it if you want to listen in a car and stuff like that. And we're working on it, kind of testing out a couple different formats, and then we're going to get that going on there. But first of all, hey, I want to thank all the subscribers that do tune into the YouTube channel here, or hopefully will tune into the MCOM Chat podcast. And I see some are in the chat tonight, and we see good evening to Chuck, KB8AYT, Evan, Paul, Hotman, and good evening, Liberty Cave, WS7PB, Fourth and Birch, good evening, and yes, thank you very much. We'll have a moment of silence a little bit later for Nextel. Dean, KQ4ADJ, and Shah. I always slaughtered the last name there. But Shy, good evening. I'm not going to even bother to slaughter that for you. But, hey, Communications and Cigars. We talk about communications, and, of course, let's talk about cigars. And also, Brian just checking in. Brian, WM8G on there. So, Communications and Cigars, let's talk about it. What is the cigar portion for tonight? Well, guess what? This time of the year has a situation where a lot of people like to come up with things, and one of the gifts that a lot of people give is cigars. But this time of the year, that little tidbit for cigars is something to be a little bit careful about. And the reason I say to be a little bit careful about it is due to the fact that there's a lot of great sales, but you want to make sure you're getting some high quality cigars. That's right. High quality cigars is the name of the game. So if you are going to be purchasing cigars from someone and you are not a cigar aficionado or someone who knows about cigars, don't be afraid to ask questions. Cigars do get a rating, so the higher level of cigars will get an actual rating on there. And your cigars that are in the 90s, especially the upper 90s, tend to be a little bit more of a higher quality cigar. There are numerous different types of cigars that are out there also too. Do not assume that, hey, one type of cigar is the same as the other, okay? A Schweitzer Sweet is not the same thing as maybe a Romeo and Juliet, or there's there's a lot of them out there. There's so many higher quality cigars out there. Just don't make that assumption that one cigar is the same as all the other cigars out there. So keep that in the back of your mind on there. Also, don't be afraid to go to an actual cigar shop. Lots of cigar shops are around different places on there. Make sure that the humidor is a good humidor. Don't be afraid. Most nice, good, high quality cigar shops will have some sort of humidor or quality control for temperature and humidity for the cigars that they sold. But don't assume just because the cigar shop has a humidor that it is a high quality humidor. I've walked into a few of them where literally in the humidor, I've seen mold growing on the cigars and stuff like that. That usually tells me bad temperature control, bad humidity control. But don't be afraid to ask about the cigars. Go out along in different places. There's many different places also online you can order from. I do not endorse or are employed by any of them, but for example, cigar.com, cigars.com, numerous different ones you can look on there. They'll do give good ratings on there, and you'll see a lot of good reviews about them. And hopefully, if you're going to buy someone a cigar or something like that for the holiday season as a gift, that will get you started in the right direction. Before we move into the main content of tonight, I see some more people checked in. Brian, I just said Brian, good evening again. KH6QM, Christopher, good evening. Dan Martin, good evening. Kevin, KD9TXI, and Scout75, good evening on there. So, I would like to take a moment of silence now and remember Nextel. Prior to being Nextel, it was FleetCall. And that's what today's episode is going to be about. So let's take our moment, bow our head. Okay, good. So, Nextel was ahead of its time. Hands down ahead of its time. And the reason I say ahead of its time is because that technology that Nextel was is what is being sought after today. Alrighty? Nextel, in the simplest form, was a push-to-talk system that grew out of an analog system, but used the concept of in essence, cellular network, which it really kind of wasn't a cellular network, but we'll get into that in a minute, for wide area coverage. That's really what it was. Alrighty. One of the biggest things about communications is that obviously to have long distance, long range communications, you need to have an infrastructure that could actually manage, right? It could take place. So, yes, I could talk portable to portable. Yes, I could talk portable or mobile into a repeater. I could maybe even talk across linked or interconnected repeaters. But the thing about it is that you need to go ahead and have a large infrastructure to be able to cover a large geographical area to have a large user base, right? You can't have numerous people logged in or accessing one tower, alrighty? And understanding that also going further is not everybody's going to use that technology in that one area. So what's going to happen is if you try to go ahead and have a bunch of people use one tower and there's a lot of congestion, you only have one frequency, it's not going to work. All right. And then you have to somehow increase capacity. Now, do you increase in capacity using conventional? Do you increase capacity using trunked? There's a couple different solutions that have been out there since the 80s. Alrighty. Now you even go one step further, which then you start to now take a look at things and saying, okay, wait. Now, how do I go ahead and now connect the towers together? How do I connect sites together? Now, more importantly, then what you have to do is when you grow, now you're starting to figure out, wait a minute. So if I have a trunked repeater system at this one site here, and I have 5 channels on that system, and I connect them together, do all of those talk groups on that one tower connect over to the other tower, this and this and this and this? So that has been the growing pains of trunking and communications on there. The second biggest thing that's on there, which is really happening this day and age, is frequencies, right? Frequencies are really full. There's not a lot of people. Everybody and their brothers got frequencies. You have frequencies for low power radio to radio communications, like the little radios you see, like they carry at, like the Best Buy, the stores, the little business radios, right? They do about 1 or 2 watts. Motorola makes some, Kenwood makes some, those kind of things like that, right? So you have those little frequencies. Well, they don't go too far and they're meant for low power. But now you're going to have frequencies that, hey, I need to put up on a tower 100, 200 feet, however much I can get it up there. And now those are going to cover a wide area. And then you got to make sure those frequencies don't, you see what I'm saying? That's why trunking really started to take place and started to take over, is because of network capacity. And then it allowed you to increase capacity and then also have reusage of frequencies in a certain area. Now, why am I going all this? John, what the hell does this have to do with Nextel? Well, thanks for asking. The reason it has to do with Nextel is Nextel wasn't always Nextel. Alrighty? Nextel, in essence, did not become Nextel until 1993. That's right. Nextel itself was started, in essence, in 1993. But Nextel was born out of something, and it was born out of the company called FleetCall. So, as Sophia would say on the Golden Girls, picture it, 1987. And what happened in 1987, there was a company called FleetCall. And it was formed by Morgan O'Brien, Brian McCulley, Chris Rogers, and Peter Reinheimer. Excuse me. What that concept of FleetCall was that it was a SMR, a specialized mobile radio. So what is specialized mobile radio, John? Well, that's where we got to go back even a little bit further. So back in the 70s, the FCC started to take a look at what we were using for frequencies. And they saw, I truly do believe that the FCC saw that there were going to be things that were going on and knew that radios were going to take place, was going to take precedence. They were going to be used because we didn't have cell phones in the 70s. We didn't have cell phones really in the 80s. We didn't really kind of have it until like we got into the mid 90s, right? And then there was like a bag phone calling in for air support. But what happened was these two-way radios were alive and well. And what happened with specialized mobile radios, what happened was that the FCC took out chunks of the 800 megahertz section, because how we use 800 megahertz today is not how we used it back then. So they called it specialized mobile radios. They channelized it, alrighty? They really channelized it. They said, these are the certain frequencies. So you had like 865, 9625, and this, and this, and this, and this. And they started to automatically start to channelize it so that it wasn't going to overlap with one another. Or if someone was on 865, 9625, they could be 865, 8575, as an example, okay? Spaced out channel-wise, right? So what happened was that FleetCall started to really kind of expand, and they started to have coverage in areas of the United States that people were wanting to use radios, and they were using 800 megahertz radios. Now, this is where left Twix, right Twix things. The reason a lot of people jumped on the 800 megahertz bandwagon back then was because 800 megahertz really was channelized and blocked off for certain areas for certain usage. Now, mind you, public safety wasn't on 800 at that time. Alrighty, it was for the most part the new kid on the block, the new band we could use, and it was designed to be used for business communications. That's why it was called specialized mobile radio on there. Okay. So what happened with specialized mobile radio is that you were able to go ahead and get spectrum. And really, if you really take a look at it, SMR, specialized mobile radio, kind of covers VHF 220, UHF 700, 800, 900 megahertz. Once again, it was kind of area carved out for there. But really, they really kind of said, you know what? We're really going to go ahead and focus on 800 at the time because that's when things wanted to do it on there. And it was really designed for businesses and not interpersonal communication. So not amateur, not like GMRS or nothing like that. It wasn't like mom and dad want to go ahead and use a radio or something. No, it was like designed for tow trucks and taxi cab companies and construction companies and stuff, where the concept was you're a business here and you need to communicate as a business. But then there's another business over here that needs to communicate. And there could be a possibility someday that a business would need to talk to that business. So what better way to go ahead and do it than to have a section of frequencies that were all sort of channelized and literally be able to say, hey, in the concept of SMR, what does it say? Hey, if I am in Minneapolis and I have this 800 megahertz radio, in essence, because the channels are channelized, so, you know, channel 42 may be 865-9625. Well, channel 42 might be used in Chicago, so would my radio be able to go there and I might be able to use my radio there? Well, yeah, kind of. So that's kind of what SMR was all about. And FleetCall came along, and FleetCall really hunkered in on this. They said, you know what we're going to do is we're going to take this, and we're really going to say, hey, we know how to do this. We know how to utilize this. So that's where it kind of came about. And it was, once again, 1987. So this is really kind of a new concept for out there. But one of the things that FleetCall did was this FleetCall went along and allowed you to do two-way communications, but then also too, is FleetCall allowed you to have interconnect. Now, what is interconnect? Well, interconnect is a concept of saying of it, like connecting your telephone line. Now, back in the day, it was POTS, plain old telephone system, right? Physical copper wires that would be integrated into a radio. So that what would end up happening is that you would be able to take a radio of some sort, like ba-bam, on the screen here. And what would be able to happen is that you could have this radio here, and when you keyed up, you could actually enter a DTMF code, or the radio would have in program the DTMF access code. When you entered or keyed up on these access codes, what it would then, in essence, it would return a dial tone back to you, letting you know that the telephone or the line was active, and then literally on your keypad, you would dial that telephone number that was on there. Now, lots of times it was to local telephone numbers only, because back then it was, you know, it was expensive. It wasn't free long distance like we have now and everything, right? You actually had to pay for long distance and what have you, but you would be able to call locally. And then when you were done, sometimes it was just simply hitting the star button or hitting the pound button, or you would change a channel and it would be pre-programmed tone, whatever the case may be. But what it was that FleetCall would allow you to do this. Now, the reason it was called FleetCall is because it deals with the concept of trunking that we don't really per se use anymore in what we use for trunking today. All right. Back in the day, this was kind of a basis of control channel trunking, which meant you had a control channel, you turned your radio on, the radio would listen to that control channel, and what you would do is you would kind of key up, and what you would do is by switching that knob at the top there, okay, so this little knob right up at the top, the little, what looks like a channel knob, it actually wasn't a channel selector, because channels were in your radio. It was actually a talk group selector, and what you would do is you would select your talk group. Now, here's where it kind of got a little interesting, because back on these types of radios, you in essence on the top, and you can't see it on this radio here, and I apologize, I tried to get a good picture of the older radios, but they didn't really kind of work on there. But behind that volume knob, there was a little 3-position toggle switch. And that toggle switch would either say ABC, or it would be AB and like a star. Okay, what that switch was, it was programmed for your different fleets. Alrighty, and what I mean by the fleets is that you would have this concept of a fleet of users you would use. Okay, so you have to think out of this hierarchy. Okay, so the hierarchy, in essence, was kind of a design concept of I have this company here. Alrighty, and underneath this company, let's say it's a construction company, and underneath this construction company, I actually have the builders. I have the delivery and the haul people, and then maybe I go along and I have administration staff, field supervisors, whatever, okay? Now, what happened was that based on that ABC switch, it dictated what fleet of people you're talking to. So if you're on, let's say, the construction workers fleet of your company on that system, you'd be, let's say, letter C for argument's sake, okay? So you'd be on letter C. And then what you would do is you would turn that top knob, and that top knob might be 6 positions, might be 8, might be 16, might be 12, depending on your radio, that kind of thing, right? But that would represent a talk group that you were actually using or on. Like maybe C1 was you talk to all the people on that fleet. Okay, so you talk to all the construction workers. Maybe C2 was group 1 construction workers, and so on and so forth. However it was designed, however it was set up in that radio there. But then if you wanted to talk to the administrative staff, like the supervisors, then you would flip your switch over to A in this case. And then maybe in this case, instead of being talk groups, it was private calls. So basically you would switch it to A1, you would talk to supervisor 1. Switch it to A2, you would talk to only supervisor 2. Now this worked on a trunk system because every time you keyed up, it created a new channel. So if you had a 5 repeater trunk system, you could have, in essence, 4 to 5 conversations taking place at one time. All right. Now, let's get back to it. Why do I bring this up? Because what happened is that with FleetCall happening here, when you had this take place, this was how you talked across there. You talked within your fleets. Alrighty. So if I was a construction worker, maybe my A and B position switch wasn't working. Okay, because I was a construction worker, and maybe I only needed to talk to my foreman, which might be on C1, and then maybe I needed to talk to a couple different groups. But that is how it did it. It went by fleets, and that's why it was called, in essence, FleetCall. Now, let's go back to another hierarchy or tier level on here. Maybe it wasn't a construction company that had 3 different divisions. Maybe you're a tow truck company that is working with maybe a salvage company that's maybe working with another company. So what you then could do is you could mix and match fleets in one radio. So what happened on these radios then, and when in the years that I was in, when I first got into a radio, like the late 90s, this is kind of how a lot of things were set up on there. Okay. And a good example is Mall of America. Working with some of the trunk systems at Mall of America way back in the day with the companies that I worked for, they went along and they had that set up. So like security was maybe the A fleet, and then housekeeping was the B fleet, and maintenance was like the C fleet. And yes, maintenance could talk to security or, whatever, hospitality, whatever. You could do those mixers, but you could also mix the different companies if you needed to. So let's say A company, anything A1 through 8. So talk group A1, A2, A3, A4, A5. That was all mine. But let's say my company works well with Joe's Plumbing, okay, for whatever reason. Well, Joe's Plumbing may need to talk to me with my company, which I might be in construction. So what I could do is that A fleet would be my stuff, B fleet would be Joe's Plumbing, but on Joe's Plumbing it was the opposite. A was his, B was mine. But we knew that if I needed to talk, he needed to talk to me, he could flip over and talk on my talk group, or I could flip over to his. And that's where FleetCall really shined. So not only could you have interoperability, because shit, that wasn't even a word back then. No one knew what the hell that was, right? Okay, you could have cross communication on one tower between different companies with agreements on there, and it didn't have to follow that whole thing either. Don't get me wrong. Like maybe I had A 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are all mine, but then B 1, 2, and 3 is Joe Plumbing, and B 4, 5, 6 was maybe the landscaping company, whatever the case may be. We could do that. And that's where FleetCall shined. That's where they did this, okay? And it was really super cool. That's where that chirp came up. That's where Nextel first came up with the chirp, right? That chirp was on these radios, because that's how you knew you had access to the trunk system. You keyed up, chirped, you unkeyed, and then you listen. You tried keying up again. If you got the chirp, you could talk. If you got the bonk, then the bonk would happen, and then it wouldn't work. Alrighty, so that is what FleetCall was all about. Really, really great idea. But what happened is that we were now moving into a phase, and what we were moving into the phase is now we fast forward to 1992, and when we fast forward into 1992, we started to run into something very, very interesting. What we ran into, and this is actually in a New York Times article that was in there back in 1992. It discusses how FleetCall bought, and I'm gonna cite the article here because I don't want to get it wrong here. Whoop, bumped my camera there. Cite the article because I don't want to get it wrong here. So of course, bear with me. But it was an article from, here we go, from the New York Times, and it was entitled "Company News: FleetCall to buy competitor for $320 million." Now, mind you, FleetCall wasn't, in any way, shape, or form the only kid on the block. There were other companies that were out there that were doing the same thing. All right. So what was happening was that people were going ahead and saying, hey, this concept of SMR and SMR was all over the place. Even in little Northwest Wisconsin, where I grew up, there was actually in the middle of the county where I lived, actually in the middle of the Native American reservation up there, they had a nice huge tower location, and FleetCall was on that tower. And I remember going ahead, and it was great because I was playing around with scanners, and I was fascinated by the 800 megahertz band. I am to this day fascinated by 800, but not for public safety, but for business usage. I actually do love 800, believe it or not. But what happened is that they would do, and once again, these specialized frequencies, I remember listening on 865.9625, and I would hear a public safety person who was doing some stuff up there who happened to have FleetCall in his vehicle, but he would use it more for the interconnect. He would be using the phone, and he would be talking on the phone. So I was listening legally to SMR frequencies that would also do interconnect. Now, no one thought of it. Everybody was like, oh, no, there's no 800 megahertz stuff up here. There's no. So anyways, that's where SMR came from, and that's where all of a sudden FleetCall started to grow. So in 1992, there was a little company, and I should say maybe little because it was $320 million, which in 1992, that was a huge chunk of change, okay? How much did Twitter sell for? Anyways, Dispatch Communications Incorporated, alrighty, was the name of the company. They're based out of Bethesda, Maryland. And in a deal, they bought, FleetCall bought them. And FleetCall was based in Rutherford, New Jersey. Alrighty. So they were going to go ahead and do some stakeholder stuff and how they all buy out and everything like that. Competition of the transaction, subject to, of course, shareholder approval, is expected in the second quarter, but Dispatch is the third largest company in the business. Okay? In the business. So FleetCall was up there. They bought out Dispatch. So now FleetCall is buying, and FleetCall is getting bigger, and we're dealing with SMR, okay, frequency. So there's no worry or room or stuff like that on there. But the question was, why was FleetCall buying Dispatch Communications Incorporated? And no one really sort of knew about it or anything like that until 1993. And that's the next pivotal point in the timeline of this all. And what happened in that timeline, in that part on there, is that it went to a new technology. So what happened is that, as you see, this was a Motorola radio, alrighty. FleetCall worked a deal with Motorola, and Motorola said that they had this new digital voice technology. And this new digital voice technology was called IDEN. Now, IDEN was basically a concept of doing what FleetCall was doing, but making it digital and doing it in a different way. So IDEN, believe it or not, stands for Integrated Digital Enhanced Network. What happened is that IDEN took and used TDMA, time division multiple access, and then overlaid it with a special type of digital. So basically, IDEN was kind of sort of like a VSLEP and everything like that. It's once again, tomato, another episode. We can talk about that in some other time. But basically, what it did was it said, you know what? Hey, here's what we're gonna do. TDMA, much like, hey, what else is out there? DMR. Wow. Okay. TDMA would do time slots. So now if you had let's say a 5-channel site system, before with your analog FleetCall stuff, you would have 5 conversations max. Now we're TDMA. Now we're 10 conversations max. And now what we can do is now that we have increased capacity, we could start doing enhanced features. We could start doing things. And what happened is that FleetCall started to notice and said, wait a minute here, this would be great, because now what if we had the ability for people to talk like a radio, But also, what if they wanted to use it as a phone? Thus, in 1992, we had, I should say 1993, correction, 1993, we had iDen, and we now had Nextel. Nextel, next generation telephone. Nextel. That's what Nextel was in essence was about. Now what happened is now we're digital. We're no longer analog. So what happened was FleetCall started to shut off things left and right. Okay, they started to shut off. Now that they were Nextel, they weren't FleetCall no more. Analog was dead. Long live iDen, right? And that's where we knew it. And what happened was that FleetCall started to reuse frequencies that they had. So what happened was all the frequencies they bought from buying out Dispatch, what did I say again here? Dispatch, whatever. It was Dispatch, a solution company, right? That other company. They took their frequencies, which were probably in the same markets as FleetCall's frequencies were. And now what did you do? Well, you had 20 frequencies maybe, but that wasn't 20 frequencies. That was through TDMA, at least 40 channels on there. Now what started to happen is if you take a look at this device, it was a two-way radio and a phone put together. Now, this would later become a bane of existence for Nextel. And the reason it would become a bane of existence for Nextel is because Nextel was being marketed as a two-way radio type communication that uses or has the ability to do telephone. Okay? That's, once again, towards the end of it, this is where things will kind of come and play, and we'll show you from there. But now here we are, 1993, and now FleetCall's dead, Nextel's alive, and you had changes of everything. Nextel now moved to Reston, Virginia. That's where their last bit was. You had Morgan O'Brien, who was the chairman and then the vice chairman of the company. And what you started to do is you started to see you had this growth of this technology that was coming out there. And it started to do pivotal points, because as you saw this phone here, it was an i360, I believe is what it was. And this was one of the first phones that Nextel was coming out with. And what you could do is you could see on there you had group call and you had private call. Now what Nextel did was different than FleetCall. FleetCall, you were purchasing access on the system and then you would purchase telephone connection on there. Nextel did a different plan on there. They said, we're going to give you direct connect. I'm going to let you call from one user to another user free. But if you're going to go and call and talk to a group of users, now that's a FleetCall or group calls, they called it now. It wasn't fleet, now it was group. And then private call wasn't private call, it was direct connect. So we went from fleet and private call to group and direct connect. Alrighty. And what ended up happening was this direct connect was free, 1-to-1, 1-to-1, 1-to-1. But then when you used the group call, then it charged you 10 cents a minute for every user. So if I was talking to 4 other people, it would cost me 50 cents a minute to talk to those people, because that's how they did their pricing model. Now, this, once again, caused some issues, because what they did was they gave you X minutes of phone, because their concept was this. Who are using these? Okay, who's using this type of technology? Tow companies, taxi cab companies, constructions, businesses. This wasn't mom. This wasn't dad. This wasn't, I need a cell phone and stuff like that. No, this was a technology device designed to be used for industry to be able to have it all in one device. I didn't need to have to carry a bag phone that looked like, once again, the old joke, I'm calling it an airstrike. I could drop kick it across the high school gymnasium and then pick it up and still use it, right? So what happened was that it was offering a little bit of something, and that was really what was pushing and promoting the iDen network. As time went on, people said, I need more sophisticated devices. And what started to happen was Nextel started to see the shift. It wasn't, hey, this is a radio service like FleetCall was that had a telephone or an interconnect. This is like a phone service that also allowed you to have walkie-talkie. So now everything changed. It was no longer radio with the phone interconnect. It was now a phone that could act like a radio and have instant communications. And they marketed that, Now, if we actually go ahead and take a look at it, the next big one that came into play here was the actual flip phone. And this was a giant flip, a big thing in the technology. And this was the i1000 series phone. And let me tell you, man, this was the creme de la creme of a phone. If you were a businessman, you had this phone. You didn't have any other phone that was out there. You had this phone whatsoever. It was a flip phone, but it had a windows. You could see on there, it was like a little window. And when it was closed, you could actually have the two quick buttons on the front there. Okay. So flip was closed, covered the keypad. You had button A and button B, and you went along and you used it. And then they came out a little bit later with the i1000 Plus, which the i1000 Plus was basically a concept of saying, hey, it's more smoother, it's more defined. You had a holster for this. I had an i1000 Plus, man, and I was the cat's. Yeah, I mean, I was like this. Had a retractable antenna on there. But the interesting part about it was, as you see with this pivotal phone on there, wow, they went to the flip phone. They're in the phone concept. And they were totally in the flip phone concept. They were totally in the phone realm now. That's what their whole marketing has shifted. FleetCall, radio with interconnect capabilities, trunking, talk to different users. Nextel, you need to contact on the phone, or if you don't have the chance to dial, instant one push button contact. That's what it was. That's what Nextel started to grow to be. You could even see this, how it started to go along. And they even started to come out with more and more models. And they came out then with a whole variety of flip phones. Now, one of the phones that is not on here is actually the i90, which was the kind of the predecessor to the i1000 series. But the one on the left-hand side, that was the i95C, and that was a color phone. But as you see it, these were a lot of the new popular phones, the flip phones on there. Now, they did make candy bar phones. They did do this, and stuff like that. But what it was is, look at the phones that they were doing. They were using flip phones. It was all a voice technology now, not two-way, but a telephone technology. They even did try copying models from what other cellular companies were doing at the time. They were trying to say is after 9 o'clock. It was, after 9 on Friday up until 6 a.m. I think it was like on Monday. It was free nights and weekends, and then. They would have it that like holidays would be, they threw all these gimmicks, which were phone-based gimmicks, not a two-way concept design on there. And that's what they did. Now, they were starting to market themselves hard. And once again, marketing themselves hard as saying, hey, we are a telephone network that has push to talk. And it was, once again, kind of cool concept. But this got them into trouble. And how it got them into trouble was that people started to complain, and people started to say, wait a minute. There is cellular band, okay? There is a cellular band at that time, okay? And it was below the SMR band. And so what ended up happening was, as I said, well, wait a minute here, because you had the likes of AT&T and Singular then around there. You had Verizon, or prior to Verizon, Bell South, GTE South, all those kind of things like that on there. And they started to say, wait a minute, Nextel, you're in the two-way radio portion of the band, and you're using it as a telephone. This is not correct. This is not what you're doing. And they're saying, no. But you have to understand, it is a two-way radio. Well, but more people use it. What's the majority of your system being used? Well, a lot of people use it for phone. Right, but so they're using it for phone. No, but you have direct connect. So what happened was that Nextel, it was about around 2000, I think it was. 2000, maybe 2001, but around 2000, I think it was. Yeah, about 2001, that Nextel kind of saw this was coming. They kind of knew they were starting to get in hot water. Before Nextel operation was in essence, worldwide, but more so even nationwide, you were restricted to geographical areas. So what happened with this geographical area is that you were on your fleet, and then you could talk to people on your fleet. Now, if you wanted to cross-talk to fleet, like FleetCall could do, you could, but then you'd have to charge some money. And if you wanted to be on the Builders Network fleet, where if you had an Nextel, it was Fleet 21. I don't know why 21, but Fleet 21 was the Builders Network fleet, and you could be on there, and you could talk to anybody in that fleet. So if you were a construction company and you knew someone else at Nextel, you paid extra to be on that Builders fleet. Otherwise, it would be your own fleet. So for an example, when I started with Nextel, at the time, my girlfriend, my wife later on, but my girlfriend at the time, I got us Nextel phones. It was pretty cool. And I'll never forget, we were in the Minneapolis region, out of the Twin Cities region, even though we were in Wisconsin, it was the Twin Cities market, and we were on region 104. So our code was 104 star, and then we had our own fleet number. And I forgot what our fleet number was, but it was a multiple one there. And then we were like, so let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I was unit 1, and then she was like unit 2. So that's how we would communicate. We do 104 star 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 star 2. Hit the button, and I'd have my little chirp on there, right? And that chirp was quite significant because once again, that meant you had access to the system, that you could talk. Not so much as like the system was crowded, but basically could your phone hit a tower? Because now you were trying to reach out to the equivalent of cellular towers. So with that, they saw the heat coming on. They said, we need to get away. We need to somehow leverage ourselves against being a phone service. So what they did was they opened up interfleet connection. So now I did not have to be on the same fleet to talk to other people. So let's say I was on fleet, once again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and my unit was 1. But let's say I had a buddy who happened to be on fleet 5, 6, 7, and he was number 18. So now I could do is enter 104 star 5, 6, 7 star 1, 2, 3, whatever his number was, push the push to talk button, and as long as he was in the same region. Okay, so let's say we were both in Minneapolis, Minnesota market, we would be able to communicate with one another. Once you traveled outside of that market and you were in a different one, so let's say I'm in Minneapolis, he's down in Chicago, right? It wouldn't cross connect. I couldn't use my two-way outside of my home market. Well then, as things started to progress, Nextel started to see they were being limited by growth. And the issue was this IDEN was the proprietary technology. You could not roam on IDEN. You could not roam on Nextel unless it was another one. So like I think there was TELUS in the there was TELUS in there, and then also too is, and someone might correct me, there was another one, Mobile Link or Southern Link, I think is what it was, that was down like Florida and all those things that a private company built, and you could roam between those networks, but those were IDEN based, okay? But you couldn't talk across nationwide. Well, then what they did is Nextel said, okay, wait a minute here. I don't want to get people in trouble. We're going to open it up. Now what they did is they opened it up, and this was about 2003, if I remember correctly. I might have to correct my citation, but 2003, now you could easily go ahead and cross connect or direct connect across any sort of Nextel. Whether I was in New York and someone was in Los Angeles, or someone was, in Minneapolis and someone was down in Kansas City, Missouri, as long as there was Nextel coverage, you could go ahead and do that. And then Nextel's like nationwide network for phone and two-way, no roaming, you know what I mean? And they really were pushing the direct connect thing. And this kind of sort of appeased the people who are getting angry and saying, you're a phone service in a radio band. No, we're a radio service that happens to have phone. More people are using radios. And what that did was it worked. It opened up more usage of the direct connect system for two-way radio usage. But what happened was that people wanted to expand, and then came along Nextel Partners. And Nextel Partners came along, and basically what that sort of was that it was sort of like mom and pop companies that wanted to open up or put up Nextel infrastructure and link it in. So what was happening now is you were having things that were connected between markets that Nextel didn't put up, but these Nextel partners did. And then what would happen is you'd have roaming agreements. So basically, Nextel partners could sign up people on Nextel, and then what they would do is that they would have usage of the whole system. And for the people they signed up, and it's a whole agreement, hey, I can use your system, you can use my system. What does the person know? The person doesn't know anything. Their phone is always going to say Nextel. You don't know about it. Okay, fine, cool, not a problem. So that was life, and that was going on, and everything was good. But now what happened is now we're stepping into 2004. What happened in 2004 is that there was the proliferation, because of post 9/11 and everything, the proliferation of, we need to get all of public safety, we need to get everybody back on the same bandwagon. And then the FCC said, well, we're going to now reorganize the 800 megahertz band. And we're going to go ahead and take this and this portion and this portion and this portion, and everything was interlaced. So you might have public safety frequencies here, and you might have SMR Nextel frequencies here. And what was happening is they were getting intertwined and twisted with one another, and they were causing interference to one another, because there was what they call guard bands. And guard bands was the frequency spacing between the two different types of services, which wouldn't interfere with the other service. So what happened was basically they had what they call NAPSAC channels, or NPS PAC channels, which are National Public Safety, I forgot what it stands for, but they were about the 866 to 869 area. And then like Nextel was the 851 to 854 area, and they were all sprinkled and everything like that. And it was really, really horrible and really, really ugly. So what they did was they said, you know what? We're going to go ahead, and there's going to be a rebanding take place. And oh my God, was that a nightmare. And basically what it said is okay, Nextel, you're going to have to take these frequencies here, and you're going to have to move them over here. And the people that are on these frequencies are going to have to move over here. And now we're going to group the frequencies together. So we're not going to be like this anymore. We're going to be like this in a different frequency. So we're going to be separate from one another. Public safety organizations had executive orders to vacate all Nextel channels for 3 years, which means it opened up eligibility rules. So basically what it was is that, okay, public safety agencies, you need to move down and let Nextel go to your frequencies, and then once those frequencies open immediately, then you can go on their old frequencies to space it out properly. So it wasn't a refarming of the whole band, but it was more so you had this kind of going on. And then so what happened was that public safety said, okay, you had to get out of these frequencies. So we still had these here. Let's call these here. Nextel, you can go here. And then with this gap, which was Nextel, now public safety can go back in there. This caused a problem because this required a lot of money. And that's where we start to see the demise of Nextel. Now, the demise of Nextel started basically back at the end of 2003 is really what it was. With them beginning hit, if you remember, lawsuits were being placed against them and everything like that for actual violation of the bands and everything like that on there, because they were using a phone in the SMR band and this and this and this and this, and a lot of the lawsuits were being dismissed, and Nextel did things there. But that's when we started to see the decline. The growth of Nextel also really hurt Nextel also itself on there too. Because they wanted to grow, they had Nextel partners, but Nextel partners wasn't looking to grow like a cellular company will and just kind of do a whole bubble mass. What they were looking is they wanted, and their main focus was to connect these two different markets together. So up by me, they wanted to connect Minneapolis to Green Bay. Wow, wait a minute. Green Bay wasn't even a Nextel thing. So Nextel partners pushed from Chicago or Milwaukee basically up to Green Bay, and then pushed over and then covered the interstates in between. They knew that was going to be the money market areas. So what ended up happening was that now as this demise started to fall, Nextel started to go ahead and saying, we're losing a lot of money. We're losing money because we have to pay for all this rebanding. And in public safety, and this is a catch-22, a lot of public safety use Nextel. So public safety won because this progression to 800, once again, wasn't really happening yet, but it was in the planning. So 800 really wasn't being used too much by public safety. So Nextel had to pay the fund of the bill of saying, wait, I got to go ahead and we got to relicense everything, which... Don't get me wrong, Nextel didn't have to buy new licenses. They kind of got licenses as part of this refarming. But now what you have to do is you may have to buy new antennas. You may have to buy new duplexers. You have to maybe get new base stations that can go to these new frequencies. A strong cost involved. If we take a look in 2004, more towards the end of 2004, on an average, Nextel had a revenue of $13.368 billion. However, their operating income was approximately $3.283 billion. Well, that's about a $10 billion difference. Yeah, it is. But now if you take a look at what happened, their net income truly was only $3 billion. So $3 billion was their net income. Operating expenses was $3.283 billion. So you're looking at $283,000 they had to come up with to meet it. Their total assets were roughly $22.744 billion. So that was the whole infrastructure because Nextel partners were underneath them and everything like that. Total equity, though, of their equipment was $9.408 billion. So $9.4 billion was the equity, but their assets were 22.7 on a net income of $3 billion. Okay, you don't need to know about anything about business, but you could see that they were hemorrhaging. And one of the reasons that they were hemorrhaging was iDen was getting old, and it was getting extremely old. Because what was happening is that it was technology from the early 90s. Nextel was looking to upgrade to WiDen, and WiDen was going to be a concept of saying, okay, here's what we're going to do. It's going to go ahead and be a 3G equivalent of iDen. iDen, you can almost argue, was 2G, but they were going to be a 3G equivalent. But what happened was Nextel said, we can't do it. We can't do it. We're going to fold. We can't invest the money into WiDen technology, WiDen technology, change out all the towers and everything. And that's when they went along and started to look for a bailout. And the bailout came in form of the now defunct Sprint. And what Sprint did is Sprint only wanted to go ahead and have Nextel for one purpose. They didn't give a damn about push to talk. They didn't give a crap about anything. They wanted their frequencies. And that's what Sprint did. Sprint bought the Nextel technology or company and bought the usage of the iDen technology. At that point in time, it's now 2005. And Sprint then went along and said, you know what? We need to start capitalizing off that. They immediately took and started to phase out voice on 800 megahertz SMR. They went along and said and came up with these stupid hybrid phones that you would use the Sprint network for voice, but if you wanted to talk on Nextel, you would still use the 800 megahertz. It was a total disaster. Sprint had control of Nextel by then, and that's where we now say officially Nextel as a company died in 2005. What Sprint did, though, is Sprint said, don't worry, we're going to go ahead and we're still going to keep the two-way radio technology alive. What they tried to do is they tried to do these mobile platforms of Kodiak, and they had somewhat thing called a Q-Chat for a while Sprint was doing, which didn't work that well. But they tried to go ahead and migrate the push-to-talk over to basically a data side instead of actually being as close to a digital two-way radio that was possible. Verizon kind of saw this too, and Verizon tried doing push-to-talk, once again using Q-Chat technology. And it was finally at the point where Sprint tried ReadyLink, which is SIP-based, and it just was pretty horrible. Finally, what ended up happening is they said, about 2009, they said, you know what, we're going to do iDen devices again, and we're going to still continue to push-to-talk. By then, what we knew as Nextel was gone. it was a hybrid, horrible monster that no one really cared about. And now what happened is those that were actually trying to use Direct Connect found out that, hey, many people went along and moved off it, because now we're in the early 2000s. Now we were starting to get into smartphones and PDA type devices and doing text messaging and cross text messaging and even some voice messaging. So people who were using two-way radios or Nextel for the two-way radio purpose went over to two-way radio technology. And then that's where we kind of saw it. As time went on, more, we started to see it even get worse. And that's where, unfortunately, Sprint won in their plan to go ahead and take over all the 800 megahertz frequencies that Nextel had and was now being able to use for voice, and took it over. In May 30th of 2012, Nextel announced that it would start shutting down the network in June of 2013. At that point in time, what was remaining left of the Nextel network was very fractionated and horrible, to say the least. And within a 30-day time period from June 1st, 2013 to June 30th, actually 12:01 a.m. on June 30th, 2013, Sprint had successfully shut down every single Nextel base station, and had then had plans or had even converted most of the infrastructure already over to Sprint voice technology. And thus, my friends, Nextel as a company died 2005, but then their full digital technology finally turned off June 30th, 2013. And that is the story of FleetCall and Nextel, a sordid tale of love and hate and sadness and any other thing you want to put in there. But you know what a show wouldn't be without this part. You know what really bends my antenna? That we, as technology users, did not see or forecast of what was going on. And what I say by that is that right now, one of the biggest things that the features of phones that are going to be used on this day is things such as a quote-unquote walkie-talkie. Apple has a walkie-talkie feature on their watch. There's other apps that are out there that do allow you to do walkie-talkie style. One app that I personally think that comes very, very close to a lot of things is what I call Zello. And Zello realistically sounds even like the chirp of Nextel. And I'll even turn it up here a little bit more. You hear that chirp. That's right. That is the chirp of sort of how Nextel used to have their chirp. And what it is basically is when you hear that chirp, you can talk across a platform of two-way communication. And that platform of two-way communication can be one-to-one or it can be one-to-many. As a matter of fact, technology now has this great concept of using a two-way radio device that runs actually off of the cellular network that has this functionality of now two-way radios not being restricted to just actual RF like a normal two-way radio. I wonder where they got that idea from, Motorola Wave. Point of the matter is that it is amazing how technology is basically in a revolutionary state. Well, wait a minute. What do you mean by revolutionary? What I mean by revolutionary state is that we fight against ourselves in technology only to go ahead and let it sit and see someone come emerging as a victor. And then years down later, we have another revolt or a revolving and a reviving of that technology. Once again, Nextel technology. Way ahead of its time in this case. Who would not love that ability to be able to instantly communicate with one or another person? Hey, I don't want to dial. I don't want a text message. I need to go ahead and ask someone and say, hey, Billy, Bob, Joe, Sue, Jess, hey, are you available? Do I have to call? Hey, Bill. Okay, Bill's not there. Hey, Bill, it's John. Can you give me a call back? Okay, hang up. Okay, call Susie. Hey, Susie, it's John. Hey, oh, you're not there. Okay, give me a call back. Or hey, Jess, here, Jess, can you call me, please? And then with type prediction and typing with there, it comes out, so it looks like I had a stroke because my fingers are too fat to type. No, what I want to be able to do is this. And I keyed up and I just talked to someone on there. That is the amazing part of how that technology came around. However, now it's the second generation of this push-to-talk technology, and all the new people are going ahead and looking at it and saying, wow, that's amazing. Why hasn't anybody ever thought that before? And then I quietly sit in a corner and I look and I laugh and I say, we did have it, children, and it was called Nextel. So that's it for this week's episode. Kind of a little bit of a longer one, but I think kind of an interesting one. A FleetCall and Nextel, born 1980, born 1987, died 2005. So thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Communications and Cigars. We do appreciate it. I saw a lot of good chats on there. Hey, if you got a reminiscence of a Nextel story, don't be afraid to put it in the chat or go ahead and add it to the comments after today's episode on there. Thank you for tuning in. The holidays are right around the corner. I want everybody to stay safe. I want everybody to be happy. I want everybody to enjoy the holiday season. I'm also going to go ahead and say that sometimes the holiday seasons are tough on people. That includes, I know, public safety workers. Being a public safety worker myself, I can sometimes see the hardships that other people don't have. This holiday season, go ahead. Don't be afraid to reach out to someone or show an act of kindness and check on your fellow man or woman to make sure that they are okay and that they are doing well. Sometimes we are on pain on the inside, but happiness on the outside. So stay safe, and if you have a cigar, sit back and enjoy it. And hey, if you're into colder weather like I am, also stay warm. Until then, everybody, take care.